Well, let's get going. The purpose of this series of talks is really just to share my experiences on a deeper level. It's going to be information I've never spoken about publicly before, for this reason that I didn't think humanity was ready to understand it at a soul level. And I've been doing a lot of work over the last sort of well, last 15 years, but um, particularly on Facebook since 2014. So it's been about 8 years, and I've wanted to, and I kind of have been watching the temperature of the Earth. Now, what I mean by temperature is just the rate at which molecules vibrate. Okay, so at when water is ice, the molecules vibrate at a very low temperature. When it gets to get water, the temperature increases, and when water gets hotter, the molecules vibrate and that becomes gas. Okay, so that's what I mean by watching the temperature. It's watching the energy of the planet, the temperature of the rate at which people are waking up and absorbing energy. So,
Come on, go, Maggie. Come on, Maggie.
can I ask everybody just to mute in the meantime because I'm picking up background sounds?
Go, come on, come on.
What I'm going to be doing in the series of talks is explaining the experiences I had, what they were, how I perceived them, um, how I began to understand them, because at the time I woke up, I was not a candidate for this kind of thing because I was very much into sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of lifestyle. Um, I had a background in seeking and spirituality. I had been born into a Roman Catholic family and with an Irish background, so I have that kind of, religious inclination. I was designated as the priest in the family because in our family traditions, in the Irish family tradition, one of the children, they have lots of children. I came from a family of six, I was the youngest. One of the children were designated as either a nun if you were female or a priest. So they kind of tried to lead me in that way over the years, and I got to a stage that I just rejected all of that. Um, so in 2013, I began to have a series of events happening in my life that began to change my life completely. But it took a long time for me to really change into the person that I am now. It took me 3 years of some very weird experiences to make a commitment to understanding the stuff, and not only understanding it but embodying it and living it. And that's what made the difference in my life when I understood what I was being told. Um, I was led on a series of journeys, and I will take you through some of the journeys that I went on and explain what happened, what I saw, what I experienced, and what my responses were to that. But you should understand that in the beginning, I was just an ordinary guy with very little background in science or, technology. I didn't understand a thing about energy. I just, was like everyone else, believed that energy came from heat, And so in the beginning for me, it was very, very difficult to understand. But the evidence that I was experiencing was so compelling that I researched it myself. And fortunately, from a young age, I've always asked a lot of questions. I've questioned everything from a very young age, you know. And the problem with being a curious person, the answers that I got most of my life didn't satisfy me. When I was a child, it was, don't worry, you don't need to know that now, or, you know, shut up and just listen, and, you know, and no one seemed to be able to give me any answers to the questions that I gave. So I kind of lost some of my ability, but I've always been curious about things, you know. I wanted to know what kind of world I lived in, and who. And the big question was, who am I? What am I doing here? And who are all these people? Those were the three questions at that before I woke up that I really wanted answered. And those questions, three questions, I think are very primal to all of us. We all want to know who we are, what are we doing here, and who are all these people. And so it was when I started to get some answers on that from higher dimensional beings, I couldn't resist but to listen. But having said, I listened, but I wasn't committed to the information, because quite frankly at the time I was afraid that that even as I was waking up and I was telling people what I was experiencing, my close friends and family, they all thought I was going cuckoo. They all thought I was losing my mind. And they thought, you know, some of my friends even told me, Colin, you're losing it, pal. You don't want to go down that route, because that is going to blow your mind. But I persisted with it, and went on with it. And then in 2013, 2003, there were a series of events that led up to my being curious about this. And I was told in the bathroom shower one day while I was having a shower that the universe was going to send somebody to teach me. And sure enough, about 2 weeks later, I felt the presence at the end of my bed, and I looked up, you know, from under my duvet, and there was a man. There was a being standing at the end of my bed, and he was as high as the ceiling, very big, and he wore this kind of monk's cowl cloak with a cowl over his head, so I couldn't see his face. And that put me into such a state of fear. You know, I was shaking. I just felt sick, and you know, I really had to work hard to control my bowels and my bladder, because I just wanted to let it go, because I thought, oh my God, what the hell is this? The devil's come to fetch me. But then, so I ducked under the duvet, and after a little bit of time of gaining my composure, I decided to look out over the duvet, and there was nothing there. So I woke my girlfriend up, and she was a Reiki master and been helping me to understand some of the stuff. And she said to me, well, you were told that someone was coming to teach you. Maybe that's a being that's coming to teach you. So the next time this happens, don't hide away. Don't be afraid. Well, it happened about 3 weeks later, 2 to 3 weeks later. I was alone at home in my own bed, and I felt the presence at the end of my bed. And even before I took a look, I had to kind of really gather my courage and my faith and self-belief and a lot of things to be able to face this experience. And when I looked up, there was this same being standing at the end of my bed, and we just looked at each other. And I didn't know what to say, and he didn't know we knew what to do, but there we were, just looking at each other. And then he began to telepath to me. It was the second time I'd experienced telepathy. And this voice in my head said, I am Maha, I've come to teach you. And I didn't know who this being was or what he was, so I just said to him, well, I agree, that's fine, I want to be taught. And then he said to me, I can see that you're very intimidated by my size, so I'm going to appear to you in your dream state so that you won't be as intimidated by this whole thing. So I said I agreed with that, and because, it was very intimidating for me. It was like facing Goliath, and so after that, he took me on a series of journeys. And the first journey he took me on was in dream state. And he took me on this journey where everything was dark. I couldn't see anything, but I could just feel the presence of beings around me. Um, and as I experienced these beings, they just had a welcoming presence in my consciousness. So I just went along with them, and we were flying through the ether somewhere. And then we came down into like a city, and we went down at very fast speed, and the people that we went to were all sleeping. And they did a kind of a ritual around these people where they did a chanting and breathing, and then they all breathed in and they breathed out. And then some of the beings that I saw lying there asleep, they lit up, their bodies lit up, and I could see these colors radiating from their bodies. But most of the people didn't. There was no reaction. And so we did this to about 10 or 12 people, and then we were on our way back from the journey. And on the way back, I said to my higher self, what was the purpose of that journey? And he said, we want you to know that we did that same exercise over you when you were asleep one night, and your auric fields lit up. And because your auric fields lit up, we recognized that you had the potential for further soul development. And he said, we want to assure you that you will, from this time forward, you will not be alone ever. That we will be there close to you, so that you have our presence and the comfort of our companionship. And the next journey they took me on a journey to what they called the cave of forgiveness. And the experience that I had was they took me into this cave where the walls were like luminescent, and they shone with different colored lights, but not very brightly, but they were just there. I was aware of them. And then there was a staircase, and they asked me to walk up the staircase. And as I walked up the staircase, in a narrow staircase, the walls had this luminescence about them. And then when I got to the top of the staircase, I looked around, and I was in another cave, again with the luminescent walls and the light shining. And there was a pool in the cave, and they told me that I should take off all my clothes and walk and lay myself down in the pool. And as I approached the pool, it was like a turquoise pool, and it had a kind of a pearl-colored bottom. It wasn't very deep. So I just lay in this pool and immersed myself in it and lay there wondering what the hell was going on. But and then I got out of the pool and then walked down the stairs to the down to the cave below. And I asked this Maha, I said, what was the purpose of that? And he said, you needed to be cleansed. And I said, cleansed? You know, I just took a shower before I came here, so what do you mean cleansed? He said, no, it's not your body that needs to be cleansed, it's your mind. And so you went into that pool so that your mind could be cleansed. And I said, well, what was it cleaned of? And they said it had to be cleaned of memories that don't serve you. And I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but I accepted that there was some purpose in this journey. And then the third journey they took me on was a journey into they didn't tell me where I was going. I just went with them in this dark, and then I began to see lights coming from all different directions, and they were waves. They were going up and down across each other like a meshed fence almost. And as we progressed nearer to this wave field, as I was traveling through this wave field, I saw these two waves intersect, and they sparked, create a spark. And in that spark, I saw myself, and I saw my entire history in an instant, like in even less than a second. My whole life was there and it was gone. And we traveled through there, and when we got back, I said to myself, well, what was that all about? And he said, those were the wave fields. And I said, well, what are the wave fields? He said, humans can't see them, but they're all around humans. You live in a sea of waves, electromagnetic waves, and those electromagnetic waves create your reality. They're part of the construct of the universe, and they exist everywhere. There is no such thing as empty space. And I didn't have any understanding of what he was talking about, so I just accepted it and left it at that. And then they took me on many other experiences like that, and slowly they began to teach me about, the first thing they taught me about was the mechanics of creation. Okay, and the mechanics of creation is when these waves intersect, they create conscious awareness. And that conscious awareness is part of a soul construct, okay, of a oneness in the universe that is filled with these experiences. And that taught me that we are all part of a big universe having our own individuated experiences of it. And they took me, they began to teach me about the mechanics of creation, that when these sparks come together, it creates conscious awareness, and conscious awareness has a soul construct. And that soul construct lives many lives. So the one little spark that I saw, where I saw my life go past me in a flash, the next lifetime that I have will also be the same, but it's all woven into a fabric of light and sound in the universe. And and I didn't understand what they were talking about at all. And then they started teaching, they asked me to go and find out about frequencies of light waves. They asked me to go discover and research the shape of waves and the properties of waves, electric and magnetic waves. And so I did that. I started to research that, and I looked at that, and I discovered that magnetic waves go out in concentric circles, like ripples in a pond. When you throw a pebble in it, the ripples go out. And that electric waves are omnidirectional. They don't go, they go in one direction. But having said that, in the universe, direction, there is no such thing as a straight line. It goes out and goes around and then comes back in on itself. So it creates a kind of circle. But it's, all this stuff kind of was really mind-bending for me as I experienced it. But having said that, I'd come out of a drug culture before, and I'd many times taken drugs and had some pretty weird experiences on LSD and cocaine, and I never mainlined on drugs. So I didn't feel comfortable putting, some substance into my body. But I had these weird experiences. Some people have it, and they have ayahuasca experiences. But really it just is a mind-expanding experiences where we can go outside of the norm and see ourselves see ourselves as these physical manifest beings. And yeah, Daryl, you're right, it is a toroidal shape. If you understand toroids, you'll understand a lot about how energy works. And then they took me into understanding the evolution of the soul, and they started teaching me the properties of the soul, and that the soul is what we are. We are fields of energy, electromagnetic energy, and the electric energy manifests in our 3D reality here as thought and as male, the gender male, and the magnetic waves manifest in our reality as emotions and female, and that magnetic waves have a certain rotation and electric waves have a different rotation. So like a toroid, you've got these collapsing energy happening with a 0 point in the center. And that 0 point is very, very important when it comes to interstellar and interdimensional travel and navigation, which I'll explain to you a little further as we get on with this. But so I was having these pretty weird experiences and understanding that I'm not a physical being, yet I am manifest as a spiritual being. So I wanted to know how that works. How do I manifest as a manifest physical being when I'm actually this powerful energy being? So they began to teach me a lot about that. And what they told me is that waves of light and sound create are the means by which a holographic experience works, a hologram works. And if you understand holograms in our reality, it's all about life and light, which is electric, and a sound, which is magnetic. And so I began to learn a lot about the nature of holographic reality. And in the end, I began to understand that in those light and sound waves, we experience ourselves, we give ourselves or are meant to give ourselves experiences and be in control of our own experiences. But in this planet, it doesn't work that way because our minds are occupied with the nonsense that we are told from the day we are born here. And we are literally controlled through a continuum of narratives that change, but they keep our attention focused on their narrative so that we create their hologram. So our holograms here are scripted, they're directed, produced, and we are just the actors in it. And it's like we're in a movie and we are not in control of the movie. Someone else is in control of the movie. And so I began to understand that. Then they wanted, and I said, well, because they kept referring to our reality as a 3D reality. So I said, well, what is a 3D reality? And they said that the dimensionality is created by three forces. The first force is electric waves. The electric waves, which manifest as thought and male, and magnetic waves, which manifest as emotions, female. And these contra-indicative opposite polarity waves create our manifest experiences. And that we are supposed to be in control of those, but we don't know how. And I'm going to be talking a lot about, in the future, about how we control those experiences. Because the whole purpose of what I'm going to be telling you is to help humanity to take back their reality. And reality is experienced as a hologram. And if the problem here is we have our hologram controlled. And as you saw in the last 2 years, there was this narrative about a virus that was going to kill us all, and it didn't kill us all. Now that narrative is beginning to die and lose its traction amongst human consciousness, they've come up with a new narrative, which is a war between Russia and Ukraine. So they keep distracting us with different narratives, to keep the human minds occupied. I've no doubt that none of you are actually buying into their narratives, but you are able to transcend it. And but the problem is we have, so many people around us, fortunately less and less people around us, who have bought into this narrative. And the reason I'm giving this information out now is because I've noticed in the last 2 years how many people just in my little neck of the woods are waking up. They're realizing that these narratives are just that. They're narratives, they're not true. We are being told lies, and we have been told lies from the beginning. And so people are beginning to wake up to the lies. But if you wake up from the lies, what are you going to wake up to? What is the reality? And that's why I'm presenting this information to you, so that we can understand our place in the universe. We can understand the power that we hold within us, and we can learn how to exercise that power in a rational, ethical, moral, consistent way that changes our hologram. Now, I know that might just sound theoretical to you, but I want to tell you about another very important journey, and this journey actually changed my life. This was the turning point in my life. Before I get on to, how powerful we are as beings. After 3 years of training in April of 2006, I I was taken on a journey, and my mentor and trainer up to that point, Maha, told me that he was going to introduce me to a new mentor, a new trainer, and someone that would take me through the rest of the process of waking up. And I was looking forward to that, but I had no idea who this being might be. And so we went off on this journey, and we were stopped in a place, and there was just mist all around me, and I couldn't see anything. And I said goodbye, paid my respects to my higher self, Maha. It was, in a sense, a very sad experience for me, because I'd grown quite close to him, because he had been such a faithful companion, answering all my questions, being very patient with me, because I was still very much in the human kind of consciousness going through those first 3 years. And then when he'd left, I stood there in the mist, and I felt the presence of someone in the mist. And it was a very loving, kind, non-threatening presence. And so I relaxed and just waited to see what was going to happen. And then as the mist began to clear, I saw this very tall being standing in front of me, who had blue skin and feathers. He wasn't completely covered in feathers like a budgie, but he had feathers on his head, and a little top of feathers on the top of his head, and a beak-like mouth, and the most beautiful eyes I'd ever seen in my life. When I saw this being, they kind of sparkled. Now I should preface this experience just so that you understand. I had to do a lot of energy work to get my consciousness up to that level of consciousness, so that would allow me to go into other dimensional spaces. And I think that's what humanity is going to go through in the ascension process, because we have to raise our frequencies to experience higher dimensions. Now, what I can tell you what that means, in a sense, is when you're watching a television program, there are other programs running at the same time. And when you change the frequency modulation of the TV set you're watching, you can watch another program. So by changing the frequency, you are able to see a different program. So we are, in our holographic reality, we have to raise our frequencies, and in this next couple of videos, I'll explain what that is and how to do that. We have to change the frequencies so we are able to view a different reality. So I had to do a lot of work in raising my own frequencies, and which I did, and I was very successful, and I practiced it conscientiously, doing exercise and techniques, and learning to breathe properly, and learning to the chanting that I had to do, the sound tones. The sound tones, the sound is a magnetic field of energy. So when you speak, you are creating a magnetic sound of energy. When you sing, you create a magnetic sound of energy. When you chant, you create a sound of energy. And earlier I spoke about the three forces that create manifest reality, and I said electric and magnetic. But the third force is pulse and rhythm. Okay? So I had to learn how to stop being so frenetic in my life, and to breathe slower, and to change the pulse of my life. so that I wasn't leaping into the future all the time, because that's how I'd lived my life all my life. I was thinking about the next thing that had to happen. I was thinking about the next thing that was to come. And so I went from one like experience to the other. I was like on a fast film track, watching my life in real reality. So I had to spend some time just with nature, and and I learned a lot about nature during that time. That nature is more consciously aware, really, than humans are, and yet we are greater than them. And I'll explain that when I talk about soul evolution. Um, humans just have forgotten who they are and what they are, what they're here to do, and what their purpose is. So I had to do a lot of energy work in order to raise my frequencies, my understanding of the universe, to calm my breathing down, to get into a state of no fear. I had to learn how to go into the 0 point state of no thought and no feeling, where you don't feel anything, you don't think anything. And that takes a lot of concentration, and being away from people, and being away from circumstances, and being away from the feeling of I have to do something, I've got to do something, and just being content to be in a state of stillness, and just feel nature, because often nature just does that. It goes into a state of stillness. And in that state of stillness, it can express itself, it can grow, it can, it has all these things happening inside of it, but it doesn't have to express it in the external world. So a flower, for instance, can just stay there all day and just have all this stuff going on inside of it, but it doesn't have to go out and call out for bees. Hey bees, come look at me, look at me. It's all got that built in, the beauty of the flower and the smells that it attracts the bees. So I had to really get into that oneness with nature, and change the pulse and rhythm of my life. And that took a lot of concentration, but I was able to do that through breathing, and I learned how to fill my lungs, top lung, middle lung, bottom lung, and breathe out slowly. And then pause, and then bottom lung, middle lung, top lung, pause. And while you're pausing, you're in 0 point. That's the still point. And then you breathe out again. So you're breathing, and as I'll explain in further videos in this series, that everything in the universe breathes. Believe it or not, the earth breathes. It's got a pulse. It's got a rhythm. It's called the Schumann resonance, and it's at a certain frequency. So it breathes in at a frequency and it breathes out at a frequency. Right now, the Schumann resonance is breathing in and out like a woman giving birth, if you understand the analogy. So having done all the frequency work, I was having this experience. And I didn't know where I was, I didn't know what I was going to experience, but there in front of me was this 10-foot tall, blue skinned, blue feathered being with beautiful eyes and very slender body, very long arms. And again, having learned to be in neutrality, we just stood looking at each other. And I just felt the vibration of love, of concern, caring, empathy, compassion, that put me at such ease, and that when I was always in that space, I always felt at ease. I felt welcomed, I felt accepted, and I felt I felt love like I'd never experienced before. And so we started telepathing with each other, and I asked him, I said, "Who are you?" And he answered in a very strange way. He said, "I am you, but in a different space-time continuum." And I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, "How can I be you when I'm me here? You know, I am here, you there. How can we be the same person?" And so he began to explain timelines, and that there are different timelines that have a different frequency, and that there are timelines of possibility, timelines of probability, and timelines of potential, and that each of us has 1,728 expressions of ourselves all over the universe, and he was an expression of myself in a different time-space continuum. And he told me that he was me before I incarnated here. Now that is also a bit mind-blowing, to know that I was there with myself, but myself as I was before I incarnated. And that it's in itself was just mind-blowing to me. But I thought, well, I won't react, I won't think about it, I'll just wait, and then when I get back home I'll think about it. And then I asked him, where was I? What is this? And then he told me we were in a certain vector and sector of the universe, and we were in dimensions 7, 8, and 9 in the 3D reality on that space-time continuum. I had no idea what he meant at the time by that, but I was beginning to catch on that waves have different frequencies, that, you know, the expression in each frequency can be different, like changing your radio frequency or changing your television frequency. You can hear different things and see different things. So I just decided to stick with it, and so I said, I asked him, "What am I doing here?" And he said, "We want to teach you and mentor you, because before you incarnated on Earth, you had a contract. You agreed to this." And I didn't know what he meant, so he explained to me that each of us, before we incarnate here with a soul contract, and that before we incarnate and we agree to come into this diabolical world to help it to become part of the universe again, to save this planet in a sense, by learning how to do that. I was very interested in what he was telling me, because I suppose I'd always had a bit of a savior complex before that. I was leading a Christian church, and I had a real concern about humanity and the condition of people's souls. So I just listened, and he told me many things about the perceptions that humans have. And he said, on Earth, you perceive this space as stars. And the star that you're on now, the frequency of the star you're on now is Sirius B. So I said, well, why don't you call it Sirius B? He says, because it's not Sirius B. It's a different space-time continuum. But humans have been brainwashed into perceiving their world as a physical world. And so you, in your holographic creation of your own reality, you are creating the sun and the moon and the stars and everything around you. And that took a little while for that little message to sink into me, that we actually create the stars. So I said, how do we do that? And he said, because all the stars that you see out there were once part of a collective of beings from many different space-time continuum who created the Earth. And they, 243,000 years ago, there was what they called the third seeding of Earth. There'd been two previous seedings, and the Earth had destroyed itself in those prior seedings. And then the third seeding, this collective of beings came together. And the beings from Sirius B were very prominent in creating, because they mastered geneticists, in creating all the different species we have on the planet. And all the species on the planet represent a consciousness of another planet or star system. So we have all that information in our DNA. It's stored in what are called our soul codes. And our soul codes correspond to our DNA. And we have two different kinds of DNA. We have genetic DNA, and we have what they call junk DNA. And medical science doesn't know what junk DNA is. But junk DNA holds all the genetic DNA holds the information of our genetic history, whereas junk DNA holds all the information of our soul history. And it corresponds to the codes we have in our souls called soul codes. When we are incarnated, we have what are called seed codes, or sometimes called God codes. And as we have experiences in here, we build information into our soul codes, and that gives us the experiences that we are meant to have in order to refine our souls. But unfortunately, most of the experiences we have on this planet don't do that. So we just keep recycling ourselves through a recycling system, and we aid and abet the demonic system here. Simply because we don't disagree. We give implied consent by our compliance. So they keep us compliant in order to give them implied consent. So until we say we don't consent, we keep giving them our implied consent. Do you see how that works? It's a law of contract. So we kind of are in a very I was going to say superficial world, but it's not superficial. In fact, it's very well constructed. The system that they have here, the matrix, we sometimes call it, it's a very well constructed and devised system. But in order for the matrix to work, they have to control us. They have to control the narrative. They have to get us to buy into their narrative. They have to kind of control us in a prison planet where we keep ourselves. We are the wardens in our own prison. Okay, and I'll speak more about how this occurred and what it was, why it occurred in the future recordings we do. But having said that, now I was in this planet Sirius B, and after some discussion, my higher self, and I asked him, I said, "What is your name?" He said, "I don't have a name." So I said, "Why?" He said, "Because in the universe we recognize someone's soul signature. Everyone has a resonant signature, every soul being, and each resonant signature is different. So we by reading your soul resonance, we know everything about you. So no identity necessary. Your soul identifies you for who you are, and it identifies your entire history as a soul being. And he said to me that I could call him Iasmir, and I said, well, why? He said, because I means is the sound tone for one, as is the sound tone for blue, azurite, and mir is the sound tone for mirror or reflection. So he wanted me to think of him as the reflection of the azurite people in oneness, which became very significant to me later on when as our relationship grew, where I began to more deeply understand the oneness of the universe and the law of one. So I'm going to leave the rest of the story for next week, and but if you have questions, we've got another 10 minutes, and if you'd like to ask questions, I'll be happy to take them now. I'm sure you have lots of questions. You can't hear that and not have questions.
Hey, Colin, it's Dan. And I was wondering, when you were going through learning about energies, and you were in bed and Maha arrived, you mentioned that he recognized your resonance and that you might be ready to learn. Were you going through energy and recognizing energy at that point and experiencing energy in different ways, and doing any daily practice at that time and everything? Were you going through that? Did you notice a change in yourself?
Yeah, I was beginning to notice changes in myself, not so much that I saw the changes happening, but other people were telling me that I was changing. They could see the changes in me. And I wasn't aware of it, but, I was just aware of the experiences that I was having, but I didn't understand the changes that were taking place in me. But other people told me how I was changing, and they made me aware of the changes that were taking place in me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to you sharing more with the daily practices that you're doing with the sound and your energy and things that we can do as well. So,
Yeah, well, the most important thing you can learn is to be in silence and to breathe. If you're just going to silence and breathe, and it's very hard. In the beginning, I found it extremely hard to not think, because I'm a thinker. My whole life, I'm just have all these thoughts rushing on my head, and to stop thinking. And the way I did that was to go into nature, because when I was surrounded by the stuff we have in our homes, and cars and electricity and all the stuff around us, I found it very difficult to go into silence. But the first time I experienced it, I was lying in a forest. I'd taken a hike in a forest, and I was just listening to a stream nearby that was babbling. And I just kind of looked up into the trees, and almost like I was in a trance. All I could hear was this babbling brook, and I wasn't thinking, I wasn't feeling, I felt totally at peace. And so I tried to feel the feeling, how it felt, and to replicate that experience, at home, so that I could feel that no thoughts, no feelings, just to be at total peace with oneself. So that's a good practice, and it's a good starting point. And then in my courses, I teach some of the chants, Uma Etre Ina E, which are the different sound tones for the different chakras, and how to open one's chakras through those sound tones with breathing. If you accompany that with breathing, And when I'm doing that, I'm trying to feel the resonance of that tone. Okay, so I've become familiar with it. So the frequency of it. And then they go to the next one. Ah, ah, tre, na, and when I'm doing that, I'm visualizing the colors of the chakras, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and feeling the tones, because the sound and the light work in harmonic unison with each other. I won't explain that now, but that's how it kind of works. And if you can, there, there's some other things you can do. Is just looking at the sky and just imagining, put yourself into it, and then, like my higher self once explained to me, he said, you have this peculiar sound tone that is yours. No one else has. And then I said, well, how do I find it? He said, go within and listen, hear the sound tone. And so I did that and tried to focus on the sound tone, and then eventually I got the sound tone. And that's the sound tone I hear ringing in my ears all day.
Great.
Sound visualization, which is imaging, pictures, thought, that's electric. Sound is magnetic, and then the rhythm that you put into it. In a sense, people say, well, higher rhythm leads to higher frequencies. It's not true. Higher frequencies are amplitude. That's the height of the wave. And the number of times that those peaks exist is your frequency. So breathing slowly, you actually are breathing, changing the waveform to a very low frequency wave. But having said that, it translates itself into higher frequency waves in your soul body. Okay, so it works in the opposite direction. And I'll explain that a bit more later in other videos.
Thank you.
Anybody else with a question?
Hi, Colin.
Hi, Diana.
Hi. I have questions as we go along, but then they go right out of my head. But I want to say that hearing you talk, the things that you say answer questions that I've had within myself most of my life. So, thank you for that. And I'm just, all ears. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I know that everybody knows this information already, in a sense, because it's all encoded in our soul codes and it's in our DNA. So in a sense, I'm not really teaching you, I'm just helping you to remember and how to feel the resonance of your own soul body. I think as we go forward, I really am hoping that people will really take this to heart and to begin to understand the power that we have. And I'm going to be explaining that, where that power comes from, how we can use that power, how we can express that power, and use it in a constructive way, and use it in an ethical way, a moral way, a consistent way. But it takes hard work. I'm not going to tell anybody this is going to be easy, because waking up was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. And I've done some tough things, you know. Before that, I'd been a sportsman, a musician, a banker. I sang in choirs, did my own one-man band, played in orchestras and military bands and jazz bands, and I was a very busy bee. And to suddenly realize that all that activity was leading me nowhere. You know, that it wasn't doing anybody any good. It wasn't doing me any real good. And I was just like being this actor in this hologram for somebody else's benefit. And they were just leaking energy off me through their monetary systems and other systems, you know, through their drug trafficking, child trafficking, pedophilia. We have no idea how much these demonic beings on this planet are leaking energy out of us all the time. And it's because we buy into their system that they're able to do it. So when you wake up, what are you going to wake up to? You don't want to just wake up from something, you want to wake up something to. So what this course is going to offer you is the alternative. What are you going to wake up to? And that is a big challenge, I can assure you. Well, folks, it's been really great, and thank you so much for being here from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful for the many people who are waking up and who are following my work. And, you know, I think I'll explain later that I have contact with higher dimensional beings, and sometimes the information they give me is not something I can easily give to people or tell people about, because it first of all, I don't want to frighten them. I don't want to mislead them, because they might misunderstand the meaning of what I'm saying. But I can assure you that everything that is happening as it should be, and that the beloveds are well in control of the situation. And there is nothing to fear. Everything is under control. And we're gonna meet our soul family one day, so that's gonna be great. Love to you all, and see you next week.
Thank you,